Hello, welcome everyone. I have a great pleasure to be today with you and talk about neuroscience of love. So we all know these kind of stories of the great love, of the great emotions. We know also the stories which are a little bit more tricky and maybe without such a happy ending. But for sure, in our culture, in the movies, in the literature, the topic of love is really widely covered. However, usually we just see one side of the whole process, of the whole dynamics. And today, I will tell you about the love from a little bit different perspective. And as you can see, we have two major characters for today. It's Alice and John, and we will look at them from the perspective of the neuroscience. And why will we have this talk about the neuroscience? Mainly because I'm very interested in the topic of love. I've been teaching love for many years already at the university, but also I'm a neuroscientist, and I did my Ph.D. on neuroscience, so I have this connection between those two fields. So as one of the very important philosophers of the recent days says, marriage does not begin with engagement, not even from the first meeting. It starts much earlier when the idea of love is born. So today I want to first dig a little bit deeper and see what really it means, like that the love starts before we meet the specific person. And having our couple, we can ask also the question, what really brings them together? What makes them to fall in love with each other? And one of the answers comes from the animal kingdom and also from the evolutionary perspective on love. So as you can see, we have all these different creatures, like animals, and they differ from the level of how developed their nervous system is or the brains are. But definitely we can see in all of those pictures a little bit of affection, or more than a little bit. So as a neuroscientist, we will be asking the question, what actually happens within the development that the brain changes within the time, but still it keeps the same functions, which only modify, but they don't change so much its characteristics, especially when it comes to the to the one very, very important topic, which is reproduction. So we have this aim, we have all these cute little animals, and you can see many of those on the internet. We quite often use them to make people happy. So the cuteness of the little ones, it's very important just to have the specific care for them, and it's the main aim of the affection in a way. So at the same time, we know that the reproduction is quite risky for the survival. We have the different stories, different sorts of animals which have to risk a lot when we are in a affection state of having the intercourse or sex. We lose a lot of attention, which can be quite dangerous for our survival. So still the question remains, like, why do we do that? What's the process beneath these behaviors which drives us to such an act? And maybe you already have the idea, because many of you experience love. So one of the major reasons for that is that when we have the intercourse, it brings so much pleasure. And from this experience, now I want to show you what actually happens in our brains when we experience this process. So we call it the reward pathway. That's, as you can see, this is the brain, and that's the pathway of the neurotransmitter called dopamine, and we will look how it spreads around the brain. So we have some very, very specific and important brain regions which are involved in such processes. And the first one is the ventral tegmental area. That's the area where actually dopamine is produced. So we will talk a lot about the dopamine because it's related to pleasure, and today I just want to point you like where should we look into our brains. Then we have the structure called nucleus accumbens, and that's very, very interesting, a very, very interesting structure. It has a lot of function, but mostly for our perspective, it will be responsible for estimating the value of the stimuli, so perceived reward. And as you can see, it can be like a very pleasant to eat a nice cake, but at the same time, we can consider that like having a nice body, it's also like a rewarding rewarding thing. So in nucleus accumbens, actually we will be developing this conflict between those two states. And as you can see, we will go from to the higher cortices to the frontal cortex. This is the neocortex related to such processes like understanding the stimuli, locating the attention. So as you can see, like in terms of reward pathway, it will be correlated with understanding how to achieve the specific reward and also how to obtain it again and again. And the last structure, which is very, very crucial, it's hippocampus. So the hippocampus in the brain is the structure which is responsible for remembering, creating memories. So as you can see, we will have the reward pathway, which makes us to experience reward, but afterwards it makes us also remember the reward. And that makes this cycle like close, because then we want to continue on experiencing such events. So when we think about translating that into the human behavior, we can think about our example couple, about Alice and John, and think what happens with them when they see each other, what brings them and what makes them fall in love. Like, that's a huge question. We all probably want to know the answer. And we can look at that from the evolutionary perspective. So we will have the specific traits which males will find attractive in females from the, again, evolutionary perspective. Like it also can be discussed, but in here we can say that males, they want to have as many offspring as it's possible. They search for fertile and good-looking and healthy partners to reproduce. And they also want a female which will be faithful. So, of course, we are talking here about humans, but also, as you can imagine, as you saw the path of evolution, it will also relate to other beings. On the other hand, for females, having offspring is much more costly. It requires much more resources. So the females will have to be more selective. They want to have the partner which will provide. And what does it mean? And what kind of features he should have? Usually it's a dominance. So the dominance on the biological level quite often is displayed on a very sharp shape of the face, and also general physical strength. So it means like the male, like if it's needed, he can run fast, he can provide the food. Quite reasonable when we think about the African savanna or places like that. We live in a little bit different times, but still the evolution is there. And now I thought that it will be good to have a deeper look and be more specific. And here you have like amazing examples of the attractive males. These are the males which you can see they have very, the chin is quite strong, and also their like body, like their face is quite square, so we can see that the faces look quite dominant. For females, the most attractive features will be symmetry and also the not having any specific strange, unusual sizes of the nose, of the eyes, or of the lips. And when we will look at the whole body structure, we have the very commonly used index of waist to hip ratio, and as you can see here, we have 6 different postures with different ratio, and you can of course guess which one will be the most attractive for most of the heterosexual males. I give you like a few seconds to have a look, and the answer is sorry? No, a little bit more. So it's 0.7, and that seems to be like the ratio of the females which can give birth more easily. So there is a good proportion for these reasons. But as the Polish researchers found that waist to hip ratio is not universal, because we can see some cultural differences. And when they went to Papua New Guinea, they studied also this evolutionary attraction for the bodily aspects, and they found that they don't really care about the ratio, because usually they marry much younger females, so they don't have like a big waist to hip ratio, but they prefer the females which have longer legs. So probably because there is a lot of bush, and evolutionary, that's much more much better strategy for survival. So that's became like a kind of a pattern for selection preference. And when we think also about what happens that we fall in love, it can be the biological features, but also when we look at the female menstrual cycle, we can see that there are some specific moments when love can happen more easily. So what I mean is that before the ovulation, females have the ability to experience pleasure more strongly. So it means that, for example, if they drink alcohol or have sex, it's just more pleasurable. And then at the peak of the fertility, so at the moment of ovulation, females have this hidden ovulation. So females mostly don't know that when it's happening, and also that happens for the males. They don't know that the females they have ovulation at the moment. But at the same time, females at the time of the ovulation, when we showed our participants the pictures of the females, they will rate females who are which are ovulating as more attractive. And females, for example, at that time, they will have the tendency to expose more parts of the body, like in this picture. So as you can see, that's an exemplary picture from the study. And we have the picture A and the picture B. And on the picture B, you can see that the female is much less covered. So it actually, by the researchers, been suggested to be as an example for this preference to kind of seduce the males. But on the other hand, so what happens, we can ask what happens in a male's body and in a male's eyes. So actually when we look at the males, they have higher testosterone level when they are around the female which is ovulating. So this is the graph for that, and as you can see, it just changes without the conscious control or awareness. So all these mechanisms, they can bring the couple together. They can make us fall in love. We still don't know what happens that we fall in love with one specific person and not the other one, even though there is like a nice symmetry, there is a good look, there is attractiveness, but still there are some factors, like these specific factors, which we don't know how they influence the behavior. So Now let's get back to Alice and John. And as we know, they will go through the life, they fall in love, and then it's a little bit more puzzling. Like probably most of you have been there, you know how you experience that. And the question is, like, what makes them to reach the goal of getting, being together and aging together? And now I would like to introduce you to the phases of love. That's what we distinguish these phases just to talk based on a neurological level of love. It's and these are like 3 major phases. The first one is lust. So that's very, very first phase when we have this very strong response when we see somebody. The next phase is attraction. It's more deep. It's connected more to the personal experience and being in love, actually. And we have the third phase, which is called attachment. So that's the phase when we feel very safe in a relationship and we know that we want to stay in this relationship. So the last phase is the phase when we really want to have sex, when we feel this biological arousal in our body, we are attracted to someone and we feel this elevation of our bodily processes. We are interested in reproduction. So again, you can see this link between the evolutionary mechanisms, and here this first phase is just very, very arousing. And when we look at the brains of people having being at this specific moment, at this specific phase, we'll see the activation of hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the structure which is related to basic motivational processes in our body, like drinking or hunger, so like things which keep us alive. So that's also very interesting that in a way this reproduction and process is very strongly involved in a brain processes. Also, as you remember, we talked about the ovulation, and the males around the female which is ovulating have higher testosterone. And when we look at people who are at males and females as well, which are in this first phase of lust, they also have higher levels of testosterone as estrogen. And what is interesting, when you are, for example, in a long distance relationship, the testosterone level will still stay really high, no matter whether it's just the first phase, the last phase, or the next phases of the relationship. So it's kind of maybe a danger, like still being on the market, or not really so much, but in some way being away of your long-term partner makes the body respond in such a way. Another very, very important hormone is cortisol. And probably when you hear this word, you think about the stress, and that's right. And the cortisol level is much, much higher at this phase. So we are actually like, our body is put in a state of like, watch out, something important is happening. Okay, so we have this bridge, and that's a pretty old study, but it gives like a very good idea how our cortisol and attribution work. So they had the solid bridge and a like dangerous hanging bridge, and what they found after participants passed through the bridge, they found that with the arousal, like with the excitement coming from passing the bridge, they were more likely to write back or like call back the female which was standing at the end of the path. So actually, like, this cortisol level makes us feel like aroused, and then we introduce like interpret it like, oh, something really interesting is happening. So for example, if you are out and you are at the adventure or at the party, you feel more aroused, you have more excitement, and then you meet somebody and you think, oh wow, this person looks amazing and it seems to be so attractive. But that might be also the reason for this attribution, that your inner state, you're just assigned to somebody. But also, when we think about this first phase, there is one more very, very interesting factor which can influence your liking and feeling a lot of attraction and bodily attraction to somebody. So actually, they ask males to wear the same T-shirt for a few days. It was they were sleeping in the T-shirts for 2 nights, and then they collected all the T-shirts. They gathered females, and they said, "Okay, can you just smell the T-shirt and tell me which male seems to be the most attractive for you?" You know, amazing adventure. And what they found is that actually there was a huge diversity within the females, and they took the samples of their DNA and they looked at the immune system. So they looked how what actually is their biological immune system DNA. And they found that the males which were the most attractive for the females, these were those who actually had the most diverse immune system from their own. So what does it mean actually? It means that probably we want to choose someone who is different from us, so we can have more diseases covered by our body. That's why, for example, when you have these the big royal families, they actually usually are getting weaker and weaker, and one of the reasons is the immune system. So we want to have it, and that might be one of the reasons why there is a lot of diversity in who we like, although we like usually beautiful, good-looking and healthy people. And so now the last phase, usually it lasts really shortly, and then we will go to the next phase, and that's the attraction phase. So when you think about our couple, they met, they felt very excited, but then they start being more and more intense with each other. And the major free neurotransmitters which are involved in this phase is dopamine. And you remember our amazing reward system. It's really complex, but it makes us feel really great. It's norepinephrine, which is related to feeling like also a little bit of rush, and serotonin, which is this is quite complicated. We will get back to that in a second. And when we look at the dopamine, I don't know, maybe you've heard already, that a lot of drugs, they actually cause the release of the dopamine, and dopamine makes our experience very, very pleasurable, but also it makes us remember the nice things. So there is this memory aspect, there is a pleasure aspect. It also makes us planning, we want to do something again, so we want to arrange the things to experience the pleasure. And that's why some scientists suggest that actually love works a little bit like a drug. So there are some movies, for example, when you can see this pattern of the people being addicted, but then they fall in love and they quit the substance use for some time. And it can be explained that at that time the brain has the dopamine within it from itself. On the other hand, we can also see amazing effects of the being in love. As you can see, sometimes we suffer, we have some pain, and the scientists were thinking, so if we consider decreasing the pain level, we can do it by increasing the dopamine. And then they thought, okay, so if the love can be exchanged in a way with the dopamine, so we can maybe use the love to make people feel less pain. And what happened? They put the participants into the scanner, and they showed the picture of the beloved person while they were having their hands in a very icy cold water, which is usually very common procedure for making someone to feel pain. And the results show that when we have up to 40% pain reduction when we see person we love, and with very, very intense pain, it can go up to 15. Like it decreases, but it's still like up to 15%. So the study actually showed that the mechanism for love and the dopamine, they are like overlapping, and probably they are just reflecting the same processes. The other substance which I mentioned, it's norepinephrine. And when you think about the people being in these first phases of love, they are very chatty, they are very energetic, they don't really sleep. Sometimes you can even think that they have some kind of manic state. So that's also connected with being in this very deep attraction phase. And the very important substance, and that's a neurotransmitter, and that's serotonin. And as you can see, serotonin actually decreases with the in this phase. And the decrease in serotonin is causing you to be very, very obsessed about someone. So you wake up and you think about the person. If we think about our couple, if we have a John in this phase on the audience, he would probably see only her face like around all these photos. Like that's actually like the phase when you can't really think clearly. You are very, very involved. It's very pleasurable, but it all is leading to something. And maybe you have some idea. It leads to very deep attachment in the next phases, but also it leads to willingness to reproduce on the biological level. So what this transition point, why is it so interesting? Because as Stephen King says, the true love, like any other strong and addicting drug, is boring. So in which words, how do I understand that? The state itself, it's nice, it's pleasurable, but with the time, it becomes repetitive, and also our brain gets used to the substance. So with the drugs, for example, what do? You just get another dosage. But with love, it's definitely much, much harder. And that's the time when we are getting to the next phase. And that's the phase which we call attachment. And we will talk about the two major substances, neurotransmitters, which will play an important role. And usually when you think about that phase, this our couple looks on the left side very beautiful, but if you would check them on the phase of attachment, they would probably look like the lower part of the picture, because that's the phase when you are really easy, feeling very comfortable wearing like your pajamas next to each other and having like these very, very casual looks. And why does that happen? And what is the neural process undergoing this event? Is actually connected to this middle, and maybe you will be surprised. But once the scientists they were observing the animals, the small like kind of hamsters animals, they are called voles, and they were feeding them, and they were observing how much they eat before the winter. So we have the vole coming. And they realized that some of the voles, they always come together with like as a couple, and with the same partners, always the same partners, and the other voles, they come separately. So these are the voles, like. And the prairie voles, the ones on the left, they were the ones which come together, and the middle voles, they were coming separately. And they thought it's quite interesting because they very much look alike. They are they are different kinds of voles, but still like they belong to the voles family. And on the other hand, only from 3 to up to 5% animals live in a monogamous relationships. Like if we can talk, like if we can say that it's a relationship, but they are monogamous. So they decided to quit the studies on the grains and the food intake, and they decided to switch to measuring and observing what are their mating behaviors and what is the difference on a neuronal level of their brains, because it was very nice comparison, as you can see, that they were so similar in many other aspects. So they started to conduct the preference test. This is the social behavioral chamber for actually examining the behavior of the voles or other mammals, small mammals, probably that is important to say. And in the first phase, they were our voles. They were mating. Either prairie voles, the ones which like to live together, or mountain vole or meadow voles, which live separately. And then they were putting this the male into the middle chamber, and they were checking whether he will decide to go to the left chamber or the right one. And how they differed is because on the left there is a partner and on the right there is a stranger. So we can say, oh, like if the male is really interested in just reproducing with as many females as it's possible, after mating with one female it should go to another one, and if it is interested in just staying in one relationship kind of thing, it should go to the partner. And actually, that's what they found. They found that the prairie voles, when they were in a middle chamber, then they checked maybe very briefly the stranger just to know what's happening there. But then they had the very strong preference towards the partner, while the meadow voles, mountain voles, sorry, they had not even the stranger preference, they had the single preference. So they preferred to stay in the middle chamber just by themselves. So that's interesting behavioral result, which confirmed what they saw on these meadows. But then they checked what is happening on the brain level. So here you have the tiny brain of the voles. And the more red, the more we have the more activation we have. And you remember these structures which are related to dopamine, like nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex. And also in here we will, it's actually the oxytocin receptors. So the oxytocin, they found that the oxytocin will play like such a huge differentiation between those two different kinds of voles. And as you can see on the left, we have prairie voles, and they have a lot of oxytocin receptors, mostly in nucleus accumbens, which is strongly related to experiencing pleasure and also having the decisions for the pleasure, and in medial prefrontal cortex. Why the mountain voles, they had much less of those receptors. So actually that brought a lot of research in the fields. Like if you are interested, there are many good books and lectures about that. But the major finding and the major thought was that actually oxytocin, it makes us connected to our partners, or probably to the partner, and it makes us feel at home. It makes us feel very cozy and safe. Also oxytocin has a lot of different functions. It's related to mother and child bonding. Also, like it can be produced by cuddling and all the nice things. So we can actually influence that. So, so we are, when we think about the timing, usually people get to this very attachment, to the attachment style, like around, like after 2 or 3 years of the relationship. And that's also caused by a high cost of attraction phase. So we are after the attraction, then we go to the attachment. And when we are in the this phase, or the both of them, we can ask the question. So the the relationship is going. Maybe it's not perfect, but there are no perfect relationships, especially that's what psychologists, psychotherapists say. And the question is, will they make the happy ever after? Like, what has to happen to make them to stay together and be happy? And one of the biggest challenges people will experience in a relationship is communication and the conflicts they will experience. And actually, the scientists which were measuring the psychophysiological responses of the body, they found that there are four which are the most which brings the most predictions for which couples will break up or which will stay together. And so if you will observe those four horsemen of apocalypse, that's how they call it, you are up to 92% chance that you will not stay in this relationship. And one of them is criticism. We have defensiveness. So criticism is just saying like, oh, as my partner, you are doing everything bad. Defensiveness is like, I answer to that, no, really, I don't, but actually you do those things really badly. Then we have contempt, and the contempt is one of the strongest factors, like when we predict the divorce. So this is feeling that our partner is below us, like feeling like very superior. And actually we found, like not me, but the researchers found that when you experience contempt, even your facial expression changes. So you can have like expression of the disgust, and it means that we lift our muscles around the nose, like as you can imagine when you smell something very disgusting. And that's when you feel the contempt, like to your partner, you can have this kind of signs of psychophysiological activation. And also the stonewalling as a very important factor, and that's the moment when on a psychophysiological level people experience the strongest arousal. So they have very low oxygen level in their blood, and that's the moment when they actually decide to stop talking. Like they are not coping anymore with their emotions, and they shut down. So when you experience something like that, don't think that your partner is ignoring you. Just know that he or she is having like the hardest time ever, and then you can give him or her some support. So also our couple, Alice and John, they've been there. They use this all the bad horsemen of apocalypse, and they were actually considering the divorce. And as you can see on this map, the divorce is becoming like a very, very big issue. That's the world map. And the black color is over 50% of the divorce ratio, like percentage of the divorce. So when you think, like when we look at globally at this map, we can see that like almost half of the countries, with the data, they have more than 50% chance that the couple which is married, that they will divorce. So also we will now look a little bit at the options, like what would Alice and John go if they decide to break up. So actually, if they would go through the divorce, we don't know yet, but they read the articles and they know what's going to happen. They will have most probably the first phase, which is called protest phase, and we will have, in this phase, we will have increased dopamine and increased noradrenaline. So when you think about the stages of love, this first phase of the rejection will be very strongly connected with very intense emotional responses. We want to have the partner. We actually, when we think about him or her, it's very rewarding, but at the same time, we know we are not with the person, so it will cause additional suffering from being socially rejected. And in the second phase, after we experience these very intense emotion reactions, we will go to the acceptance phase. And in this phase, we'll have the decrease of dopamine. So we will like calm down on a way of feeling pleasure and excitement. But we will also go to this lethargy and depression state. So that's something also very painful and difficult, but on a different level. Like we actually feel much calmer. And the studies which was conducted, which showed that that was an FMRI study, and they gave the participants which were just after the breakup. They showed the pictures of the ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend or the partner, like wife or husband, and they were looking at the brain activation. And that's exactly what they found, is that they had much more production of dopamine in ventral tegmental area. They had greater activation in nucleus accumbens, in frontal cortex, and that all together it just shows the very intense like being in love reaction, right? So we know that phase is also not easy to survive, but now we know why is that all happening. Our brain doesn't want to let the person go. And the second understanding of that, it's that, for example, when you are addicted to some substance, and like maybe some of you try to quit smoking, for those, like maybe let's don't go with that. But anyway, like if you are addicted from the substance, once you quit, like you have this, your brain like actually is going like, oh, I really need this substance, and you are becoming very obsessed. So once you get a little bit of the substance, and in this case, this is the photo of the person you were in love or you are in love, then it's very rewarding stimuli. But what happened to our couple, maybe you're thinking, and they went to the therapy, and the therapist said that maybe that's a good, they can do something to increase the oxytocin level in their brain. And how can we do that? Like actually, a lot of studies show that making an eye contact with others make you feel have more oxytocin. Giving a hug, holding hands, kissing, like when you see your partner, just give a nice kiss for a few seconds, and also playing music and dancing, and also doing it together. It produces more like connection and synchronization. And when we think about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, where we were just mentioning them, so instead of doing them, you can, instead of criticism, you can make a specific request, just asking your partner to do something, giving the guidelines, like how he or she can do that. Instead of being defensive, just, try to take the responsibility. Maybe you don't agree with your partner idea, but you can look at your behavior and try to modify to improve the relationship. Instead of contempt, try to, it's nice to express your feelings and also needs and also affection towards your partner. So focus on the positive aspects of him or her. And instead of stonewalling, find a way with your partner to self-smooth yourself and him or her. So there are the strategies, and sometimes they're really hard to find by yourself. So that's why the therapies or the workshops, they really help couples to overcome this kind of circle of the negativity in a relationship, or self-education as well, like all the sorts of improving and educating yourself, because as you can see, love is very dynamic and biological process, but the question is, can we actually make it last and be pleasant and easier for us? And that's actually what this couple did. Alice and John, they made it, and that became much easier. And being in a happy relationship, that's important. That good relationships, good love makes you healthier, but it's very important. Not every relationship, just when you are in a good relationship, and when then actually your stress level will go down. So comparing to people who are in a non-happy relationship or single, the happy couples, they will have much less stress. What is interesting, the cardiovascular and immune and endocrine related health issues, they will be much less problematic, and people will be much healthier. And so it all shows that actually, like, fighting for love, also on a physiological level, is very important. What else can we do to keep the love? And as you can see, this couple looks like they have a lot of fun. And that's called interruption model. And it says that instead of, like, you're in an oxytocin attachment phase, you have very safe and good life with your partner, but actually what you are missing is a little bit of excitement, like this cortisol, like if it's not very prolonged, it makes you feel like sometimes excited, and it makes a lot of motivation and positive feelings, right? So when you are in a long-term relationship, it's also important to bring some emotions into that. What does it mean? It means sometimes just try to be apart for some time and then come together. That will make your brain like activated. You will have more dopamine, like seeing your partner again. You can argue. Arguing actually is not bad. The way which is bad, it can be how you argue, but having emotional discussions with your partner, having conflicts, it's actually good, and it makes you like more awake. Like you have the plan now for the afternoon, right? Friday afternoon, like a little bit of the arguments. And the researchers, they knew the pattern of oxytocin, and like there are models of Sternberg which also show that with the time the love becomes much more intense, and we lack the passion, we lack intimacy. But what the researchers found was that they still can see these couples like Alice and John on the last slide that are quite happy with each other, and they are quite engaged and quite they have quite a lot of feeling of love. They say they will love each other like so intensively, and they decided to study the couples which were in a long-term relationships, but of people who still feel madly in a way in love. So they did the same thing. They showed the picture of the person, and they found again that the brain of the people who are very much in love, it's not as you would expect, that with the time the dopamine level will decrease, but actually in those cases the dopamine level was still very, very high. And they suggested that probably they found such a way with interacting with each other. It's such a tender, caring, that it stimulates these deep, rewarding processes, even in this long-term perspective. So there is a hope we can keep the passion and attraction for a little bit longer. So as you remember, we have these symbols. So just summarizing the lecture, like, it's really important, like at least from my perspective, to look at love from this as a biological process. So if you are after some time with your partner and you say like, or like you are thinking even, oh, I don't feel love anymore, like what does it mean? Like, does it mean that you don't feel so attracted, or you don't feel this bodily rush when you see him or her? and maybe that's because your dopamine level is just going down, and you are getting like more to the more balance of your life. So I think that that's an important way to look at love. Maybe you are having too much oxytocin and the relation feels so safe to you. It changes. It gives pleasure and peace. So as you know, like we have this in the attraction phase, we have a lot of pleasure, but in a attachment phase, we have a lot of peace and safety and much lower stress hormones. But we know this is not easy, and probably we all know it is not easy. So maybe in the story which we were following today, maybe there is this kind of mystery, like still the things which we as a scientist, or we all as a humans, we can't really see. So what makes this less and less % of people stay together and actually make it to this great happiness? So if you know the answer, I will be really happy to hear that. And now I just want to thank you so much for your attention and being here, and also being in a space. Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, we have some time for the questions. If you are interested in some topics, I didn't have that much time. There's so much more research, and maybe I can also explain some issues or aspects of love. But maybe not the deepest and more difficult questions. But I mean, scientific questions are really welcome.
Kind of side question. So is it this kind of mechanic the same when you fall in passion with something like, I don't know, sport or a hobby or something like this?
So you mean, will we have the same phases with the falling in love with something? That's actually I didn't see any studies which are directly responding to this issue. But in a way, thinking about the mechanism of being involved, like in something, that will probably bring the rush and attraction. But definitely, like, it can be much harder with the attachment to your hobby. Like, you will not bond in a way as we do with humans. But definitely, this very intense, rewarding mechanism, they will be there. So, yeah. So partially, I think yes. Thank you. Anyone, like, please don't be shy. Like,
so are there any studies that show that, say, people with any sort of hormonal imbalances or any illnesses regarding the hormonal system, are they unable of feeling love? Is it purely on that level, or can they still have a relationship that's healthy and functioning?
Thank you. That's very, very interesting question. So one thing is that actually, when I was talking about the prairie voles and mountain voles, so that's because you cannot feel that much attraction and in the first phases. But what usually people struggle with is the long-term attachment. Like there is. For example, there are people who just want to cheat and be in a different relation, like parallel relationships. And what they did, they actually studied the prairie voles, and when they were little pups, they were separating them from their mothers. And they were thinking, like, so what happens with the brain of these pups? Because we can't obviously do such research on humans. So what will happen with the brains of the pups in terms of oxytocin when they will be isolated in the first period of life? And they found actually very, very fascinating results, which is that in those prairie voles, there were much less oxytocin receptors. So and they found on the behavioral level as well that when they were putting these pups, when they grew up into the mating process, they were much less likely to mate, like long-term mating. And I find it especially interesting when you think about humans and how we develop our attachment styles. That's a very, very important topic for psychology of love. And depending on what was the relationship with the major caregiver, we will have different patterns of behaving with our partner. So having, of course, we can't say directly because it's there are so many differences between us and voles, but it can suggest that if we don't have the secure attachment, if the caregiver is not giving us so much attention and like good relationship, then maybe we will be much less likely to bond because of the oxytocin. So yeah, that's quite depressing, I think, finding, because it says there is something on a very deep level of the brain structure which can make us able or not able. But maybe also, if we know what is the mechanism, maybe we can put some artificial receptors. I don't know. No, not now. I'm just a future teller now. But it's still like, if we understand the process, there are just the first steps which we can take. You have a question too? No?
Basically, I was just wondering whether there is some difference between like mother love and love to the partner. I mean, in some cases, for example, mother can sacrifice for the sake of child. For example, when you know that you're risking your life while giving a birth. So maybe can be some scientific application to this, maybe more dopamine.
Thank you so much for the question. And actually, the mother love is different than the partner's love. So when we look at the mothers, we still like it's very, very not that huge differences, because the process is quite similar, but we will have the differentiation, like different areas of the prefrontal cortex. They will get activated when you see the photo of the mother, and the different ones when you see the photo of your partner. So you mean something else? Two child. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know these studies, but I don't know the other, like the mother to the child. But I would still think that if there is like this specific pattern of loving the mother, then there will be like also specific way of loving the child. And also there are studies which show you like really close friends and the people who are feeling really close to, and that's also something else than being in love in a romantic love. So based on this research, scientists usually suggest that we can say that romantic love, like to the partner, is something different than other kinds of love. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I have this very specific question about one of the studies that you were talking about women that were choosing men by smelling the t-shirts, and the differences. I mean, they were choosing the men that have the most different immune system. So I'm just wondering how exactly the immune system they were having like affects the smell that they kind of like make. I would say, like how it exactly works, like how it affects one each other.
So actually, like they just had like many different factors which they were looking at, and they really wanted to see how is this physiological pattern of the smell, and that's connected with that our smells, they differ between people, and they wanted to dig deeper. And also there is like a lot of discussion in a scientific world about the pheromones and the substances which can make us smell other people that way. So it would be more in line to this kind of research, that we actually can get more additional information from from the other senses, which is also very interesting when we think about that, because our smell is getting weaker and weaker. But for example, when you think about other species like wolves or dogs, they really base so much information on the bodily smells, and so that's like one of the things which we lost within the evolution, partially when we look at the results, which suggests we still have some sense for who we should choose. You can make a test if you have a partner, like check the under armpits and smell if it's nice or not. Maybe you are missing something. Yeah, maybe you're excited. Maybe you just prefer to be in a long distance relationship with this person. When you think about the body odors, like if someone smells really bad to us, it's so hard to stand the smell. Like if you would go to the maybe like a sport changing room and smell the different people, you can definitely check if the research or if you can find some smells much more attractive than the other ones. Okay, so I think that's all, and thank you so much for your attention. That was a pleasure, and thank you for coming on Friday evening before the Christmas, and I wish you happy holidays and lots of love.